Have you ever felt that success didn't means nothing without someone to be with? Share, a millionaire man, returned after 20 years to school, where he was happy, looking for something that the money could never buy him. When a teacher recognized him with a question, that would change everything. He understood that. He had spent 2 decades fleeing the only true love of his life. Stay to the end and discover how a reunion can transform everything. Mateo Rivera was 32 years old and had a banking that most people do not. I could not even imagine. From his office in the Polanco neighborhood, in the Mexico City, I could see the horizon of skyscrapers shining in the sun, each one representing a conquest, a closed business, one more victory in its unstoppable path to success. Had out of poverty with his hands, and now owned 3 technology companies employing hundreds of people. But when the meetings were ending and the lights of the city were lit up, Mateo returned to his huge empty apartment. The walls, marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. Ceiling could not fill the silence that accompanied him every night. Had built an empire, but it had no who to celebrate. The work had been his refuge, his perfect excuse not to face what you really feared, to allow someone to come into her life. And deep down where he hardly dared to look, he knew exactly why he had chosen that. Solitude. That Friday night, like so many others, Matthew was sitting in his studio with a glass of whiskey that barely had played. In front of him, on the walnut desk, there was the album of photographs that he had kept for years, hidden in a drawer as if was a forbidden treasure. The pages, yellowish, used to be in time, and every time I opened them, I felt as if the air was changing in the room. There were the photos of San Miguel de Allende, his hometown, that magical place of cobblestone streets and colorful houses that I had left behind. When I was 12 years old, in one of the images, he appeared skinny and disheveled, wearing school uniform, mended, holding a trophy of spelling. Beside him, smiling, and Paola Morales was radiant. Your eyes shone with that spark that always made him. Had fascinated, that light that seemed to illuminate everything around them. Matthew passed, fingers on the photograph as if could touch the past. Paola muttered in a low voice, and the name resounded in the silence like a prayer. Paola had been her best friend in those years. Difficult when his family barely had to eat, while other children mocked his broken shoes and his empty lunchbox. She shared her cake, ham with him without a second thought. He defended it when the children of the wealthy merchants called him the dead man of hunger and told him that one day he would be someone important, that she knew it in the heart. Mateo remembered how she sat next to him on the benches of the patio under the bougainvillea tree, and he spoke of dreams and adventures as if the poverty did not exist. There was something about her way of looking at him that made him feel, even when I had nothing, when his family had to move to the Mexico City looking for better opportunities. Matthew promised that I'd come back someday, but the years flew between studies, jobs, student loans, and the constant hunger to build something big. 1 decade turned into 2, and the return that never promised so much came. However, Paola never came out really of his mind. Every time some woman approached him with interest, Mateo found some reason to move away. Too busy, too focused on business, too tired for relationships. Complicated. Those were the excuses I repeated, but the truth was different. None of them were. Paola, none of them had that laugh that sounded like bells, that generous heart. I was left without expecting anything in return. That unwavering faith in him when he was just a poor child with no future. A parent. Matthew had compared each woman with a childhood memory, and all had fallen short of a 12-year-old girl who existed alone in her Memory. He wondered if Paola would continue. In San Miguel de Allende, if it had been. Married. If you would have children, if you ever... I thought about him. The idea that he could. Forgetting it hurt him more than he thought. I was willing to admit. That night, looking at the photographs under the light, dim of his study, something changed inside. Of him. I couldn't keep running away from what I had. His heart had been screaming at him for years. Silence. He closed the album carefully, like someone who closes a chapter that is about to reopen in a way. Completely different. He stood up and walked to the window, observing the lights of the city that never slept. That city that had given him everything, except the only thing that really mattered. It's about time, he said to himself. Himself, feeling how the decision is, sat in his chest like something inevitable, as something that should have been made years ago. The next day he called to his assistant and canceled all his next week's meetings. He said, too, that he had an urgent personal matter that attend, something that could not wait any longer. While packing a small suitcase, Matthew felt a mixture of anxiety and hope that I have not experienced since. Child, he was going to return to San Miguel de Allende. He was going to look for Paola. He was going to, facing what I had been avoiding for 20 years, because money could buy a lot of things, but I couldn't. To buy the peace that only she had given him. Dice. And this time I wasn't going to leave without. Fine. The road to San Miguel de Allende had never seemed so long. Mateo drove his black pickup truck for almost 4 hours from the city of Mexico, leaving behind smoke and traffic to enter landscapes more and more familiar. The arid mountains. From Avaggio, they received it like old women. And when he began to see the cornfields and small rancherias on the sides of the road, he felt a lump in the throat. It had been 20 years since. I didn't set foot in that town. 20 years that I didn't breathe that dry air that smelled of land and history. When finally, the first view of San Miguel appeared, with its pink domes and its colonial architecture, Mateo had to stop for a moment at the viewpoint. The city was still beautiful, like a postcard frozen in time, with its cobbled streets going up and down between brightly colored houses. But he was no longer the skinny boy he had. I left there with a borrowed suitcase and dreams too big for his age. Now he came back as a successful man, but curiously that did not give him the confidence that I expected. He entered the village, slowly, almost reverently, dodging the bumps I knew from memory and greeting with a shy gesture some old men who sat in the sidewalks. No one recognized him, which it was a relief and a disappointment. At the same time, time passed in front of the main square, where the parish of San Miguel Archangel continued to dominate the landscape with its Gothic towers, and saw tourists taking pictures with the handicraft vendors. Everything had changed, and at the same time nothing had changed. The same bougainvilleas adorned the walls, the same vibrant colors painted the facades. The same aroma of coffee and sweet bread came out. Bakeries. But Mateo had not come out of nostalgia. Tourist had a very specific in mind. He drove to the less visited area of the village, where lived the local people, where the streets were narrower and the houses were narrower, modest, and there, at the end of the street, cobblestone, surrounded by trees, appeared. The wrought iron gate that had crossed thousands of times in his childhood. Benito Juarez Elementary School was still there exactly as I remembered it, although now it looked more worn by the time. The green gate needed a coat painting and brass plate with. The name was opaque for years of rain and sunshine. Mateo parked the truck and sat for a moment with hands still on the steering wheel, looking at that, a place that had been his second home. I could hear the echo of laughter in his memory, the sound of the bell calling classes, the voice of Teacher Guadalupe scolding the naughty. He remembered how he arrived Early every morning, even when not. Had breakfast, just to sit under the tree in the yard and do homework. Before the other children arrived, he remembered the afternoons playing soccer with, a deflated ball, the mornings, singing the national anthem with his hand. In the chest, the festivals of the day of, where Paola always won the literary skull contest. What am I doing here? He asked himself in a loud voice. Hi, but I already knew the answer. Fell of the truck and walked towards the gate. It was open as always. Had been, because in San Miguel, beyond the doors were still left, keyless during the day. Matthew entered and time seemed to bend over himself. The jacaranda tree was still. In the center, now larger and leafy, its branches spread like protective arms over playground. Cracked cement, the classrooms formed a rectangle around the courtyard with its wooden doors painted red, worn and barred windows. Rusty, some glass was broken and replaced with cardboard. The walls showed damp stains in the ceiling. Of Texas had several holes through which surely the rain was sneaking in. Obviously the school needed a lot, more than just a coat of paint. Matthew felt a twinge of guilt to have taken so long to return, because let his past deteriorate, while he built his future in another place. He told himself that he would come to offer financing for the renewal, which was his way to give something back to the place that gave him so much. But as I walked through the courtyard, brushing with his fingers the walls where they had once hung their drawings, in the children's race, Mateo knew that this was not the real reason for your visit. The truth, it was simpler and more complicated at the same time. He was looking for Paola. I was looking for that connection that I had never been able to replicate with no one else. That feeling of being seen and valued, that only she had given him. Sought answers to questions that had been going on for years, without formulating out loud. What has become of hers? It was still the same. A generous person full of light had thought of him at some time during these 2 decades. Could she feel, though, was a fraction of what he felt. When I looked at those old photographs, Matthew entered the main building where there were the administrative offices, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. A young secretary looked at him with curiosity from his desk, full of messy papers and folders. How can I help you? He asked with kindness, but also with that tone of suspected that it is used with unknown. Matthew opened his mouth to answer, but for a moment he did not know what to say. I come to talk to the principal, he said. Finally, Mateo, finding his voice. Professional, the one I use in meetings, when I needed to dream. Sure. The secretary observed it up and down, noticing their expensive clothes and his posture of a man accustomed to success, and something in his expression changed. One moment, please, she replied, getting up to knock on the door of the main office. Matthew waited standing, with their hands in their pockets, observing children's drawings, stuck on the walls of the hallway. There was one from a happy family in front of a house, another of a tree full of birds of impossible colors, and one more that showed Mexico with its flag, waving. Those drawings reminded him of their own, when art was the only way to dream of something better than reality. The door opened and a woman in her 50s appeared with hair up in a bun, tight and lenses hanging from a chain, over her embroidered blouse. How can I help? He asked with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Matthew extended the hand and introduced himself without mentioning his full surname, only as Matthew, a former student who had studied there 2 decades. The director, who is presented as the teacher Soledad, invited people to come into his office, a space, small clutter of old files, framed diplomas and photographs of previous generations. Mateo explained, who had been successful in business and wanted to contribute to the renewal of the school, which had noticed a deterioration of the building and felt the responsibility to help the place that gave him his basic education. Teacher Soledad, he listened with his eyes shining with contained emotion because rarely benefactors like this arrived without prior warning, offering help without asking for anything to change. It would be a huge blessing. She admitted, pointing out the window, classrooms that needed repair. We have leaks, broken windows, bathrooms that do not work well. We do what we do. We can with the budget that the government, but it is never enough. Matthew, he nodded, but his mind was already in another part, looking for the right moment to ask the question that really mattered. While the director spoke about the needs of the school, Matthew walked a wall where old photographs of festivals and ceremonies. Your eyes, they went through the images looking for something specific, some familiar face, some clue from the past, and then saw a faded photograph of his generation taken on the last day of 6th grade classes. There he was, skinny and serious, in the second row, and at his side with a radiant smile was Paola. That's me, he murmured, pointing to the photo, and teacher Soledad came over to see better. Oh, yes, I recognize some faces. That generation was very special. Mateo swallowed hard feeling as the time approached. I asked what has become of some of my teammates, he commented with a feigned naturalness that cost him work. Maintain. Someone of that kind is still alive. Generation around here. The director squinted, thinking, mentally going through the list of names and destinations. Well, several of them went to the United States or to cities. Great like you, she replied, adjusting the lenses. But some of them there are a couple that they have businesses here in the center, one that works in a hospital, another one that is police. Mateo nodded, trying to look lonely, vaguely interested, but his pulses, he had accelerated. There was a girl, her name was Paola, I think, Paola Morales. We were very good friends. The words, they came out almost like a confession, and Mateo was surprised at how vulnerable his own voice sounded. Teacher, Soledad. He smiled immediately as if that name bring back pleasant memories. Oh, of course, Paola. Yes, she's still here. Matthew's heart. He turned so hard that he thought the principal could hear it. Of truth, he asked and could no longer hide the astonishment in his tone. The woman nodded with warmth. She studied to be a teacher and returned about 8 years ago. Now work here at the same school. Matthew's world is. Stop for a second. Paola was there, in that same building, breathing the same air, walking through the same hallways where they had once been children. No worries beyond the task of mathematics. She teaches. Here, Matthew asked, and his voice sounded strange, even to himself, as if belonged to someone else. The teacher. Soledad nodded with a smile, understanding, as if I could read perfectly what was happening in the heart of that successful man who, suddenly he looked like a lost child, is teaching right now in room 3. Yes, wants to wait for her. It comes out in a half an hour when the children go to the recreation. Matthew opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out. 20 years away, 20 years of. Imagine that moment, and now I was about to, only 30 minutes and a few steps of, to see her again. Yes, he managed to say. Finally, almost in a whisper. Yes, I would like to wait for it. And at that moment, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Teacher Soledad took him to a small side courtyard where there was some cement benches under the shade of an old mesquite. Here you can wait calmly, he said with a motherly smile that reminded her of her own mother when the bell rings. From recess, he will see the children leave. Paola is always the last one out, because he stays tidying up the room. Mateo thanked him with a gesture and sat on the bench, feeling the cement, cold through his dress pants. The principal left him alone, with their thoughts and with sound, far from children's voices that arrived from the classrooms. Mateo looked at his watch at the 10:30 a.m. Half an hour, alone. Half an hour separated him from a moment that I had imagined in 1,000 different ways. For 2 decades, he passed his hands. By his hair, he adjusted his shirt. He asked if he should take off the expensive watch. Who shouted his economic success. Want Paola see him like this, so different from the child? What had it been? Or would you rather find something of the original Matthew underneath all that? Elegant clothes? The minutes passed with a tortuous slowness. Matthew tried. Check your phone. But the words on the screen, they made no sense. His mind was completely occupied, imagining the moment of reunion. Paola would recognize him immediately, or it would have to be presented. Would, having that same smile that lit up his full face, she would be married. The idea caused him a twinge of pain that I didn't expect. Of course I could. Be married. She was beautiful, intelligent, generous. What man in his right mind? I wouldn't want to be with someone like that. But then he remembered what the director had said. Paola had returned a long time ago. 8 years. She did not mention a husband. There was no ring in his mind when he spoke of she. Matthew clung to that hope, like a castaway to a piece of wood. Floating, he heard the sound of a nursery rhyme coming out of one of the salons and brought back such vivid memories that felt like he could travel back in time just by closing her eyes. He remembered those mornings when I arrived at school without breakfast, with stomach making embarrassing noises. During class, Paola always seemed to know it without him saying anything. He slipped half of his cake over his desk with a discreet gesture, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Share what I had. My mom always gave me. Prepare too much, she said with a mischievous smile, though they both knew that it was a lie. Cold days when he arrived with a thin sweater full of holes. Paola sat very close to him, so that they would share the heat. The days, exam, when he got nervous, until he felt nauseous, she would pass him a little note that said, you're the smartest of all. And he was right. Mateo always got the best grades, not because it was naturally brilliant, but because studying was his only way out of the poverty and knew it from a very young age. Paola had seen that determination in he when no one else saw her, when everyone only noticed his broken shoes and his empty lunchbox. The bell rang from, suddenly, brutally pulling him out of his memories. The sound was exactly a strident and metallic timbre that echoed throughout the courtyard. Matthew automatically stood up with the heart beating so hard it could feel the pulse in the hundreds. The doors of the classrooms opened after another, and the children ran away, like water released from a dam, screaming, laughing, pushing each other, others in their haste to reach the courtyard of recreation. Matthew watched them with a involuntary smile, seeing in them drive himself and Paola, of everyone, the children they once were, saw it with his eyes on room 3, which was on the far right of the building, right where his own classroom used to be. The door was still closed. The children, they kept going out. The courtyard was filled with movement and noise, but that door remained closed. Matthew gave one step forward, then another, like attracted by an invisible magnet, and then the door opened. First the last 3 kids running to reach out to his friends, and then on the threshold a female figure appeared who made all the noise from the yard, disappeared from Matthew. It was her, 20 years older, with long hair, gathered in a braid over the shoulder, dressed in a denim skirt and a mustard color blouse. Simple pretty. His arms were full of notebooks and a concentrated expression while he closed the door with his foot. Matthew does not. He could move. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't. I could do nothing except look at her as if it were an apparition. Paola walked a few steps into the inner corridor, moving away from where he was. And Matthew, he panicked to lose her again. Paola said, but her voice came out so low that got lost in the noise of the children playing. He took a deep breath, gathering everything together, the value he had used to build his business empire, and put him in a single word, Paola. This time his voice. He crossed the courtyard. She stopped at dry, as if she had been called for a name I haven't heard in a long time. Slowly, very slowly, he turned, head to where he and his eyes met over 20 years of absence. For a moment that seemed eternal. Paola simply looked at him without recognize. His eyes swept over his face, his elegant clothes, his posture of successful man, looking for something familiar in that stranger who had called her by name. Mateo saw the moment, exactly where the understanding came, when his eyes opened wider in his boca formed a surprise. Oh, the notebooks he was holding slipped from his arms and fell to ground with a sound. Dry, but she didn't bend down to pick up. She was paralyzed with a hand on his chest, as if he needed make sure your heart was still beating. Matthew, he asked in a voice, trembling that was barely heard over the laughter of the children. He nodded without to be able to form words, feeling like his eyes moistened in a way that hadn't happened to him in years. Paola, he took one step toward it, then another, and then suddenly I was walking fast, almost running, closing the distance between when he was in front of him, so close up I could see the little wrinkles around his eyes and the highlights that began to appear in her brown hair. She lifted a trembling hand, as if he wanted to touch his face to confirm that it was real. You don't remember me, do you? Paola asked with a soft smile that I was trying to hide the emotion that it clearly overflowed it. It was a strange, almost contradictory question after the surprise that had just been. But Matthew understood what I was really asking. Still, being important to you after all this time, or I'm just a memory. Blurred childhood? Matthew felt that. Her chest was squeezed with a mixture of joy and pain so intense that I could barely breathe. How could I forget those who believed in me when no one else? The more he did it, he answered in a hoarse voice and saw Paola's eyes fill up of tears that he struggled to contain. She put both hands to her mouth, trying to control the emotion that threatened to completely overwhelm her. Around them, the children followed, playing oblivious to the transcendental moment that was happening. For Mateo and Paola, the world had become reduced to that small space between them, where 20 years were being erased with every second that passed. Paola went down, hands, and finally let the tears will roll down his cheeks. No, I can believe you're here, she said, with a broken laugh that was half tears, half pure joy. After so long I can't. His voice broke, and Matthew, without thinking about it, took a step. He went ahead and hugged her. It was a hug that contained 2 decades of absence, of unspoken words, connecting words. Interrupted, Paola clung to him like, if I feared that it would disappear if I. He let go, and Matthew discovered that this hug was the closest thing to getting to home that I had felt in 20 years. Ella Olia Atisa, a perfume floral suave, and something he couldn't identify, but that it was completely Paola. When finally separated, both were smiling through tears, looking at each other with a mixture of amazement and recognition. You're so different, she muttered, observing it from top to bottom, and at the same time remains the same. Matthew, I see it in your eyes. Mateo blurted out, a trembling laugh. And you are still the most beautiful person I have ever met, said, and the words came out before that could leak them. Paola blushed, a blush that rose from the neck to the cheeks and pushed the look shyly. Oh, Matthew, don't say those things, he protested softly, but there was a smile on his lips that he said he liked to listen to him. Herself bent down to pick up the notebooks that had dropped, and Matthew hurried to help her, and his hands brushed against each other when both reached for the same notebook. The spark of that contact was so intense that they both felt it, and their gazes were found again. I have so many questions, Paola admitted while incorporated with the notebooks in arms. What are you doing here? When came? How long are you going to stay? Are you stopping? And Matthew knew exactly what word had been swallowed. Married. I'm not married. Responded immediately, responding to the question not asked, and saw how something like relief crossed Paola's face. Me neither, he said. She quickly, and then seemed to occur. I realized what I had revealed, and he bit his lip. Well, I didn't separate anymore. A few months ago, Matthew felt his heart to speed up in the face of that information, but he kept his expression neutral. Have time to talk? Mateo asked, pointing to the pews under mesquite. I know you're working, but Paola looked, his watch, and then to the courtyard where the children were playing. Recess last medium. Time, she answered. Then I have class until 2. But he paused, and when their eyes met again, with Matthew's, there was a determination in them that was not before. You know what? Children can. Staying with the sports teacher for a little longer. This is more important. Herself quickly headed to another teacher who watched over recess. He said something that Mateo could not hear and returned with a radiant smile. Ready, we have time. They sat on the same bench where Matthew had waited, but now the wait was over, and the time was that I had imagined for 20 years. It was finally happening. I didn't know what to say first. There was so much that I wanted to ask, so much that I wanted to count. But Paola took her hand between hers, and that simple gesture said more than any word. Tell me everything, she said softly. 20 years is a long time. Time, Matthew and I have the feeling of that we both have stories that we need to share. Matthew began to, and the words flowed like a river that had been held back too much. Time told him about the move, forced to Mexico City when he was 12 years old, like his father had, lost his job in a factory of textiles and had to go looking for opportunities. He told him about the first difficult years, living in a rented room in Ecatepec, sharing a bathroom with other, for families, studying under the light of a candle when they cut the electricity for non-payment. Paola, I listened with absolute attention, squeezing your hand when the stories, they became especially hard. Mateo, he told how he had worked as a packer in a supermarket while finishing the high school, how a wealthy customer does it, had helped to get a scholarship for high school, how had I studied systems engineering working. Night as a watchman? I never stopped, he admitted with a bitter laugh. I was so afraid of being poor again. Who could not stop working? To build, to grow, and at some point, work became my only life. Paola nodded in understanding, without judgment in his eyes, only empathy. Genuine. And love? She asked, softly. In all this time, there was never anyone. Matthew looked out over the courtyard where the children played, looking for the words. Correct. There were women, he admitted with honesty. I dated some, but never lasted. I always found some reason to get things done before they get over. Serious. He said that he was too busy, that it wasn't the time. Indicated that my business needed all my attention. He paused, gathering the courage to say what took years, refusing to admit. But the truth is that none of them were you, Paola. I compared all of you with the girl in 12 years that he shared his cake with me, and it made me feel that I was worth something. No, he passed that test. The silence that followed was dense with meaning, and when Matthew finally he dared to look at her, he saw that Paola had tears sliding down, slowly down his cheeks. "Oh, Matthew," she whispered, "you didn't have to." Load that alone. Paola wiped her tears with the back of the hand and took a deep breath before beginning his own history. He told her how he had remained in San Miguel after how the middle and high school dreaming of to be a teacher. "I always wanted to go back. Here," he explained with a smile. "Nostalgic. This school gave me so much that I felt I had to give something back." She had studied to be a teacher in Guanajuato. I had met a man. There it seemed good at first. Daniel said the name with a tone, neutral, without emotion. We got married very young people when I was 23 years old. He was very different from you and very present, or that I believed at first. Matthew felt a pang of jealousy toward that man who had what he didn't have, but he forced us to continue listening. Paola, he told how the first years had been. Well, how they had returned together to San Miguel 8 years ago when he got the job at school. But over time, Daniel had changed. He never hit me or anything like that. Clarified Paola quickly, as if she needed. Mateo knew that he had not been a victim of physical abuse, but I didn't see myself either. Really, I was like a piece of furniture in his life, someone who was there to cooking, cleaning, housekeeping, never. I asked about my day. I never told him. My students or my problems were interested. His voice became softer, sadder. And the worst thing is that I stopped being myself. I became what he hoped I would. Outside, quiet, complacent, invisible, until one day I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize the person who was there. Mateo felt anger towards this man who I had not been able to appreciate the treasure that had. "What happened?" he asked in a voice tense. Paola sighed. 6 months ago, I found out that I had another woman in Querétaro. It was not a passing adventure. It was a serious relationship. He had been living a double life for almost 2 years. The pain in his voice was palpable, still fresh. I asked for a divorce that same night. "I'm so sorry," he said. "Matthew," and I really felt it. But there was also a part of him that didn't. I could help but feel relief that this man was no longer in the life of Paola. She shook her head. "I don't feel it was the best thing that could have happened to me." Although at the time I didn't see it that way. Me forced them to rediscover who Paola was. Morales without a man defining it. He smiled harder now, a smile. Genuine. I've been living alone in a small apartment near the center, focusing on my students and myself. And you know what's weird? He looked Mateo straight in the eye. That in recent months I have felt more myself than in all the years of marriage. Matthew felt that his admiration for her grew even more. "You were always strong," he told her. "Since, girl, that's one of the things that I admired you." Paola laughed softly. "I always admired your determination. I knew you were going to be someone important. Matthew, I saw it in you from day one. That I defended you from those silly kids who, they made fun of your clothes." They looked at each other in silence, and they both felt that something was just beginning, something that maybe I'd always been there waiting for the right time. If you are liking this story, don't forget to give it like this video and comment guide. The bell rang announcing the end of recess, and both were startled as if they'd been in a bubble that had just exploded. Paola looked at her watch and let out a soft exclamation of surprise. "I can't believe there is." After half an hour, he said, putting himself in a position Pi prejudicaiously. I have to go back to my students. Mateo also woke up feeling a strange urge not to let her go, not to allow this moment to end without, to ensure that there would be another. Paola, wait, he said, and she stopped halfway through. I walk, turning to look at him with those eyes that were still exactly like. I remembered them, full of warmth and life. Can I see you again? I mean, today when you get off work. The words were rushed, as if out a nervous teenager asking. Their first date. I would like to invite you to eat like friends, he added. Quickly, though his eyes said that. There was much more than friendship in that invitation, so that we can continue talking of the old days. Paola smiled, and Mateo noticed that there was something mischievous about that smile, as if she could read perfectly what he really was saying under those careful words. I would love to, Paola replied without doubt. I leave at 2. Do you know the Grotto? It is a small restaurant that it's close to here, about 3 blocks away, going down Hidalgo Street. The food, it's simple but delicious, and it's take it easy. Matthew nodded, though he did not. I had an idea where that place was. It had been 20 years since I set foot in San Miguel, and everything had changed, but so had everything. It remained the same. Perfect. I'll pass you on to. Pick up here or see you there. Paola. He thought for a moment, and Mateo saw something. A small doubt crossed his face. Perhaps the ghost of his ex-husband. Who? I probably never picked it up. Nowhere. Come pick me up, he said. She finally, with a firmness that rang, as an important decision, as if I was choosing something bigger than only a means of transport. But no, you arrive in something very striking. For favor, you know what this town is like. Everyone notices everything. Mateo laughed. My truck is black and discreet. You promise. Although he paused, feeling the need to be honest. It's new and maybe a little pricey. Paola touched the arm gently, a gesture that sent a heat wave throughout the body of Matthew. I don't care what you have or how much it costs, he said seriously. What matters to me is that you came, that after 20 years you thought about this. School, you thought of San Miguel. Made a pause, and his voice became almost a whisper. You thought of me. Matthew felt that his heart was rising to the throat. I wanted to tell him that I had never stopped thinking about her, that her image, I had accompanied him every day for 2 years, decades, that no woman had been able to erase the memory of a 12-year-old girl, years with braids and a generous smile. But the words got stuck in some place between his chest and his lips, too big, too intense, for this moment still fragile. I always thought of you, he managed to say, at last, and those 4 words, they contained 20 years of truth. Paola, he nodded as if he had heard everything, what he didn't say. At 2 o'clock then, she confirmed, don't be late, and he turned around and walked towards his classroom, where his students were already forming a disorderly line. Matthew saw it go away and knew that those 4 hours of hope would be the longest of his life. Matthew spent the rest of the morning walking aimlessly through San Miguel de Allende, rediscovering streets he believed forgotten, but that his feet remembered perfectly. He passed in front of the house where he had lived, now converted into a boutique for tourists who sold handicrafts. Faces stopped at the bakery, where his mother bought the cheapest bread at the end of the day and that now offered crowans, French and specialty coffee. Oh, it had changed and nothing had changed. The village was still beautiful, maybe more than before, with its streets restored and their facades painted, but I had lost some of that humble authenticity that Matthew remembered, or maybe it was he who had changed so much that I could no longer see the things like before. He entered a store of clothes and bought a more casual shirt than the one she was wearing, something she didn't scream. Millionaire in the city with so much strength. I wanted Paola to see him as Matthew, not like his money. At 1:30 already, I was back at school, sitting in his truck, checking the mirror to make sure it looked good, but not too neat. It felt ridiculous, like a teenager in love, but he couldn't help it. At 12 noon, exact point, school gate opened and children began to come out, running to their waiting parents. Outside, Mateo looked for Paola in the middle of the crowd and watched her leave for a few minutes. Then, now with my hair down, falling on her shoulders in waves, soft and a denim jacket over her blouse. When she saw him waiting for her face lit up with a smile that made it all worthwhile. The 20s, years of waiting, the journey from the city of Mexico, the uncertainty of not knowing if she would still be here. Mateo got off the truck and opened the door of the co-pilot, a gesture that made Paola smile even more. How gentlemanly, she joked as she went upstairs. Daniel never. He opened the door for me. As for the words came out of her mouth, Paola made a grimace. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned, but Mateo, he interrupted her gently. It is okay. We are compassionate adults. We don't have to pretend that they did not exist. Paola nodded, grateful, and settled into the seat, curiously touching the details of leather and digital controls. It's very beautiful, he admitted, and it smells new. Mateo started the engine. Tell me where, asked, and while Paola gave him indications, both felt that they were leading to something much more, larger than a simple lunch. The La Gruta restaurant turned out to be exactly what Paola had described, a cozy little place tucked away in a side street with only 8 tables and stone walls that gave an air of intimate cave. The owner, a lady with her hair pulled back in a bun and an apron embroidered with flowers, greeted Paola familiarly. Oh, teacher and this heartthrob, he asked with a mischievous smile that made Paola blush. He's a childhood friend, Mrs. Lupita. He has just returned to the village. The woman looked at them with eyes. Connoisseurs who had seen too many love stories not to recognize when he had it in front of him. Aha, friend, he said in a tone that made it clear that he was not. I believe him not a word. Sit in the table at the back. There you have more privacy. He led them to a table next to a small window that looked out onto a interior courtyard full of potted pots with red geraniums and purple bougainvilleas. No, there was a menu. Dona Lupita simply. He said what was there that day. Enchiladas, greens, chicken and mole, roast beef with cactus. Mateo asked for the mole, Paola the enchiladas, and when the woman walked away, they stared at each other across the table of worn wood. Then it began. Paola with a mischievous smile. Are you going to tell me the whole truth of why you came back, or we continue with the story of the reform of the school? Mateo laughed, trapped in his own half-lie. Okay, you figured me out, he admitted, running a hand through her hair in a gesture that Paola found charming. Yes, I came thinking of offering money for the school. It's true, but if I'm completely honest, he paused, looking for the right words, the ones that they wouldn't sound too intense or scare Paola. I came because every time that I was looking at the old photos, I asked what had become of you, and with time that question became so that he could no longer ignore it. Paola listened to him with absolute attention, with elbows on the table and chin, leaning on his intertwined hands. A month ago I had a very alone, Mateo continued, 32 years old, one party that my assistant organized with people I barely know, expensive gifts. That meant nothing. And in the midst of all that, I realized that there was build a successful but empty life. All the achievements, all the money not. It meant nothing because I had no one that I really cared for. Share. His eyes met Paola's, and then I took the pictures. And there you were, smiling as if you knew something I had forgotten. And what did I know? Paola asked, softly with tears glistening in her eyes again. Mateo smiled tenderly. That success is not measured in money. What? To be rich is to have someone who shares your cake when you're hungry. That the love is shown in the little ones. Gestures, not in grand statements. He stretched his hand across the table with palm up on an invitation. Silent, Paola didn't hesitate for a second before putting her hand in his. The contact was electrifying and comforting at the same time, as find something you didn't know you had. Lost. I also took out our photos, Paola confessed with trembling voice. After Daniel left, when I felt more alone and lost, I looked at them and I remembered that girl that girl who I was not afraid to be generous, to defend others, to believe in people. And I wondered where Paola, at what point had he buried her, to become what my husband expected. He squeezed Matthew's hand with more strength. I came to this school looking for, to that girl, and now you appear as if the universe would like to remind me who I was and who can I be again. The food arrived, and while they were sharing dishes and tasted of the dishes of the another, as they had done in childhood, with their lunchboxes, the hours passed without to notice. They talked about everything and of nothing, of Paola's students and the funny stories they had, of the Mateo's business, explained in simple, so that she would understand, without bored, of films that had, of books they had read, of dreams they still had, discovered, that both of them kept getting up early, that they both liked coffee well, loaded, that neither of us knew, swim despite growing up in Mexico. They discovered coincidences, strange and fascinating differences. And sometime that afternoon, between the homemade flan dessert and the coffee of pot that Dona Lupita served him, insisting that it was courtesy of the house, both realized that something they were doing to each other, something that maybe I've always been there, waiting for the right moment to bloom. When they finally came out of the restaurant, the sun was already beginning to dyeing the sky oranges and roses, and neither of them wanted. The day will end. Do you have plans? Tomorrow, asked Mateo while they walked slowly to their truck. It's Saturday. I work during the week, but the ends are mine, Paola replied, and there was an obvious hope in his voice. Would you like me to show you the new San Miguel? The one you don't know, the one who has changed in these 20 years. Matthew smiled. I would love to, but with a condition. I cook for you on Sunday. Paola stopped in her tracks and looked at him with surprise. Do you know how to cook? Mateo laughed. I lived alone for years before I could pay an employee. I had to learn or starve, and it turns out I'm pretty good, though I don't promise you the level of Dona Lupita. Paola laughed, also with that laugh that sounded like music to Matthew's ears. Okay, deal done. Saturday you're tourist. Sunday I am your guest. Him. He gave his phone number, and Mateo gave him, saved on his cell phone, as if it were the most important contact of his life, which it probably was, when he left her in his apartment, a modest building of 3 floors in the historic center. Gave a hug that lasted a little longer, socially appropriate for the elderly, friends, and when Matthew led from, return to the hotel where you were. Host, he did so with a smile in the face that I couldn't erase even though wanted. The following days they became a beautiful routine. Mateo spent that weekend rediscovering San Miguel through the eyes of Paola, who knew every corner, every story, every legend of the village, visited the handicrafts where she introduced him to the salespeople like his childhood friend. They ate lemon zest sitting on a bench in the main square. They went up to the viewpoint to see the sunset over the colonial domes. On Sunday, Mateo cooked pasta alla carbonara in Paola's department, and although he felt nervous about entering his intimate space, she made it feel welcome immediately. The apartment was small, but cozy, full of plants, books, and drawings of his students pasted on the refrigerator. It was a real home, no, just a place to sleep, like the Mateo's apartment in the city of Mexico. After eating, they washed the dishes together, and there was a time when their shoulders brushed and they both remained motionless, aware of the contact of the tension that grew between. On Monday, Mateo picked her up to school without her asking, and on Tuesday too, and on Wednesday. By Thursday, Paola's children were all ready. They knew the black truck and waved. Mateo with his hand when he was going to pick up like it's the most natural of the world. 6 months passed, as if they were weeks. Matthew had extended his stay in San Miguel indefinitely, working from the village through video conferencing and sporadic travel to Mexico City when it was absolutely necessary. Your team in the capital was confused by this sudden change, but the results spoke for themselves. Matthew was more focused, more creative, more present in meetings despite the distance. Physics, for the first time in his life. Adult work was not her only reason. If it exists, he rented a small house with view of the mountains just 10 minutes away of Paola's apartment and filled her with plants and photographs, things that never had time to do in his huge empty apartment in the city. Every morning he woke up with purpose, not only to work, but to live. And living meant spending time with Paola, who had become the center of your universe in a way that it did not frighten him, but gave him peace. The school renovation had begun 3 months ago and now finally was complete. The old building had been transformed without losing its essence, with fresh walls painted in colors, new windows that left enter the light, modern bathrooms, and a fully functional roof. Repaired the day of the reopening. He woke up bright and clear with that sky, deep blue that is only seen in the Bajío. Mexican, the entire community of San Miguel was invited, from the municipal president to the ladies who sold tamales on the corner. They had placed folding chairs in the main courtyard, decorated with paper, colorful chops and balloons, and a table, long with fresh horchata waters and Jamaica, plus baskets full of sweet bread from the local bakery. The children ran excited with their clean and ironed uniforms, proud to show off their school, renewed to their parents and grandparents. Paola, I had spent the whole morning organizing everything, making sure that every detail was perfect. And Matthew, I watched her from afar with a mixture of admiration and love so intense that his chest almost hurt. She wore a wine-colored dress that I had never worn before, seen with her hair pulled back in a elegant bun that showed some silver earrings that he had given her the week before. When your eyes are found across the courtyard full of people, she smiled at him with that smile. That was only for him, the one he kept for private moments. Matthew felt that his legs were trembling. The ceremony began with the national anthem, sung by all present with hands on hearts and voices, out of tune but sincere. Then the teacher, Soledad, took the microphone to thank all who had done renewal, but especially Mateo Rivera, the former student who had returned after 20 years to give back to the school that she had given him. There was applause, and Mateo had to get up and wave with her hand, feeling uncomfortable with attention, but also deeply moved. When they passed the microphone, he had to clear his throat several times before he could speak. I'm not good with speeches, he started, and there was sympathetic laughter between the public, but I want to tell you something that I have been feeling during these months. He paused, looking for Paola, who was sitting in the front row watching him with tears already shining in his eyes. Some places teach us to read. They give us knowledge, prepare us for the world, but there are special places that they teach us something much more important. His voice cracked slightly. This school taught me to love. Silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the wind moving the leaves of the tree, of jacarandas, the distant sound of a church bell breathing, 200 people waiting for that would come later. He taught me that the love is not only romance, although it is also, is that it. Mateo continued with his eyes fixed in Paola. Love is sharing what that you have when you don't have much. The love is to defend someone when everyone, the others mock. Love is believing in someone when not even they themselves believe in themselves. Love is waiting 20 years and discover that what you felt. It was not childish nostalgia, but something real that I just needed time to grow. He came down from the small stage, improvised and walked straight into Paola. Paola insisted that the wedding be simple, without exaggerated luxuries, which would make to feel uncomfortable to the people of the town. Mateo gladly accepted because the only thing he could, what mattered to him was to marry her, not her. Pomp of the ceremony. They chose the date carefully, exactly 2 years, from the day that Matthew had returned to San Miguel as a way to honor the time they had spent building what they now had. During those 2 years, Mateo had completely divided his life between St. Miguel and Mexico City, but I was spending more time in the village. He had opened a small office in San Francisco. Miguel, where he could work without, needed travel constantly and had hired several young people to learn the business of technology. Paola continued to teach in the school I loved so much, but now he came home every afternoon at a shared home to someone who I asked about his day, and really, I listened to the answers. They had moved together to a larger house in the outskirts of the village with a garden where Paola grew aromatic herbs and flowers, and a study where Mateo. I worked with a view of the mountains. The wedding day dawned with a rainy that made the grandmothers of the people said that it was a blessing of God may rain on wedding day. It meant prosperity and fertility. By mid-morning, the sky had completely clear, leaving the air clean and fresh with that earthy smell that is unique to the Mexican countryside. The ceremony would be in the same courtyard of the school where Mateo had proposed marriage, because they had both agreed that there was no more significant place for them. They had placed white chairs in neat rows, decorated the tree of jacarandas with small lights that they would shine when night fell, and build a simple wooden arch, intertwined with bougainvillea branches, fuchsia and white color. The altar, improvised, was right where once his classroom had been there, where 2 12-year-old boys had, sitting side by side, not knowing that, were planting the seeds of a love that would flourish decades later. The guests began arriving from, filling the yard with talks, cheers, and laughter. They were all there, the teachers of the school, the neighbors of the people, some of the classmates' generation, that they had managed to locate, and from the Mexico City had traveled the employees and partners of Mateo, surprised to see their boss in a context so different. Matthew was waiting at the altar wearing a colored suit, light beige that Paola had chosen, saying that the black man was very formal for a wedding in a day village, had sweaty hands and heart beating so fast I thought everyone could hear him. By your side, there was Marco, a childhood friend who had returned from the United States, especially to be their godfather. The music began to play, a violin and a guitar playing a traditional song, and all the guests were invited to stood up, turning towards the entrance, and then Paola appeared, walked arm in arm with his father, a older man with full hair, who looked at Mateo with that mixture of threat and approval that all parents have when they deliver to his daughters. But Matthew only had eyes for Paola. She was wearing a white dress, simple without veils and lace, exaggerated that were popular, just one, soft fabric that flowed around her, body and moved with the breeze, had natural flowers intertwined in there, loose hair, and in her hand she carried a small bouquet of wild daisies that she herself had picked up that tomorrow she was perfect, she was hers, she was everything, what I had always wanted without. No, when Paola arrived at the altar and his father put his hand in Matthew's, the old man whispered in her ear, "Take care of her. Well, boy, or you'll have to deal with me." Matthew nodded solemnly, pressing the Paola's hand as if she feared it would be to disappear. The ceremony was short, but deeply moving, officiated by the village judge, who knew both and spoke with genuine affection of a story that everyone had witnessed. When it came time for the votes, Mateo had a piece of paper in his pocket with what I meant, but when I looked at Paola in the eyes, she forgot everything and spoke from the heart. "Paola, you taught me that being rich has nothing to do with the money. You taught me that success is measure how many people love you, not how many people love you, how many know you. You taught me that the home is not a place, but a person. And today I promise you that I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to give you, though, is a fraction of what you have given me." Given to me, Paola was crying openly as he said his own vows, promising love, companionship, and faith, inquebrantable. When the judge declared them husband and woman and told them that they could kiss, the kiss was soft, tender, and full of the promise of 1,000 more kisses to come. The bells of the nearby church began to sound, although no one had asked, as if the whole town I was celebrating this happy ending that seemed to be written by fate. Same. And while everyone applauded and the school children were throwing petals of flowers on the newlyweds, Matthew and Paola looked at each other and knew for sure that they had found exactly what they had been searching throughout his life. The child, poor man who had become millionaire, had discovered that the true wealth was in the arms of the only woman who had ever believed in him, even when he didn't believe in itself. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs. Remember that it is never too late for the reunions and the second opportunities. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that will make you believe in true love. And remember, sometimes life separates us of the people we love, not like punishment, but so that we can grow and become the versions of we ourselves who deserve that love. The time that Mateo and Paola spent separated was not wasted time. It was time needed for both of them to become the people who could, to build a lasting and true love. May God bless your path, and may He bless you. Always guide people and places where your heart finds peace. That just as Matthew found his home in Paola, you find that place too, where to belong, that person with whom share not only your successes, but so do your struggles. Because in the end, true love is not the one that comes in the perfect moment, but the one that makes any moment is perfect, that the light of God illuminates your days and you. Remember that it's never too late to go back, to start, to rediscover what? Love, and to build the life that you've always dreamed. Amen. See you in the next story.